Hello Stampers and welcome to Laura's Stamp Pad. Today I'm sharing with you one of Laura's quick tips, and this one is all about cutting for your cards or any sort of paper crafting that you wish to do. So I have a couple things here with me to share with you. I have just your basic ruler. This is one that I have in a little box next to my stamping area so that I can pull it out and check the spacing or check how much something is or how long a stamp might be so that I can cut a piece for that layer. Of course, I have a piece of Melon Mambo because that's my favorite color. I just love pink. And then I have the Stampin trimmer. So this has both a cutting blade and a scoring blade. So for the most part, we're not going to use the scoring blade. We're just going to be using the cutting blade. If you are wondering how to keep them apart, just remember that the cutting blade is darker and stronger, aka cut through the paper. And the scoring blade is lighter, which means a lighter touch on the paper, which means it's just going to score it. So there's a little tip for you right there. So there's lots of ways to use your paper trimmer. I know that a lot of my customers don't use it the same way I do, so I'm gonna try to show both ways. So I typically have my, my paper trimmer, I am right-handed, so I have my arm opening to the left, and I have all my numbers going to the right. And then I cut down here closest to me, whereas I know a lot of my customers actually cut up top here. And I think maybe it's because I'm so short and so this seems so far away for me to look at those numbers. And I like to look like straight down and be able to see my numbers right here, right next to me. So a couple things that I wanted to share with you is that a 8.5 by 11 piece of cardstock can be cut in half either this way or it can be cut in half this way, and that is your regular size card base. So I'm just going to cut it in half. I'm going to open my little arm here, and I'm going to cut it in half at 5.5. So I'm lining it up at 5.5, which is what half of 11 is, and I'm going to place this down and slide it across. And there is my first cut, and now I have two card bases. So these can both be made into regular medium envelope size cards. You could also cut them in half, like I said, the other way and do the card going that direction. So this card can either be like this or like this. So that's where it gives awesome versatility to whichever way. Of course, if you cut it in half at 4.5 by 11, or I'm sorry, 4.25 by 11, then your card would stand up a little taller or it would open longer to the side. So now, another thing that I typically do is I work on quarters. I don't typically like to do eighths because it's too confusing and there's too many little lines and numbers that I have to count. So I typically work on 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 of an inch. So after I have my card base, we'll go ahead and we are going to fold this one in half and use our bone folder for that nice strong crease and set that aside. So now whenever I'm going to layer one of those, then I go 1/4 inch in. So that means I would be going 4 rather than 4.25. And again, that's where the ruler comes in handy. If you don't, you know, like I have a lot of these numbers memorized and that's awesome, but I know that as you're just getting started, that's not something that you have memorized, of course. So I would then take my ruler out, measure that this is 4.25 by 5.5. So that means I need to go 4 by 5.25. So I'm just going to take this piece and do 4. So I lined it up at the 4 here. and I still need to trim a little bit of this off. I also use my paper trimmer as a ruler a lot of times too. Like, oh, I can see that this is at 5.5, so I just need to pop it in just a little 1/4 of an inch, and there we have our layering piece. Of course, this isn't gonna show up very well on pink. Maybe you can see it just a hair. You can see it's in just a little bit, but that is where you get something like this, where it's in just a hair all the way around for that nice little layered look. Also, that's how I do the inserts for all of my cards. So the inserts on my cards are 4 by 5.25, and that's just that small little like layering piece of Whisper White cardstock so that I can stamp and or write on my greeting on the inside of my card. So the perfect little layering image. When you have another piece like this fabulous Z-fold card, then you're working with a smaller piece here. So again, I take my ruler and I measure it. So this piece measures 2 3/4 by 4 1/4. So I layered the green piece 1/4 in, which is 2 1/2 by 4. So then I have that nice layered look there. And again, the inside Whisper White piece measures 4 by 5.25. So then when it comes to a stamped image for that focal point on the front, then a lot of times I take the image and I figure out either do I want it on a full layer like I did here, or do I want it to be the exact same size? So I just take my ruler, and this actually says images are 90%. So I don't want to take my ruler to the front of the case because otherwise it's going to be off. So I can just take my stamp. So I'm just going to take this one here. And this is from the Ornate Style, which is that new suite that just came out. Of course, I'll leave links down below to all the products that I'm using today so that you can purchase those. So I either take my Stampin' trimmer here and set the stamp down. I know that this center line here is where my cutting blade goes. So that's pretty much 0. So I can set my stamp here and I can see here's the 1 and that's a little too small. So we could either go 1 1/4 and it would fit like perfectly, or we could go 1 1/2 and there would be a little bit of wiggle room on either side. And so then it would also need to be, if I do a little bit of wiggle room, then I probably need to do a little wiggle room going here. So we could go 3, or we could go in a smidge, and then that's where sometimes that craziness comes in where I'm using 1/8 of an inch. So that's how I would then do a stamp. Of course, you can always take a ruler and do the same thing, where this looks like the stamped image is like 2 1/2 by like 1 1/8. So again, like I said, I don't typically do 1/8 of an inch. So you could always do an 1/8. You could also do 1 inch, and then it would just be nice and tight and kind of falling off either side. So you can always just add a little, you know? You can even add a little that has nothing to do with measurements and just say, you know, well, do I want it to be like exact, or let's just add a little and then cut. And of course, a lot of my cardstock, I have a huge scrap bag for each color. And then if you end up messing up one of them, then toss it in that scrap bag, grab another piece, and continue cutting that way. So that's another tip for how to cut based on a stamped image. And something like that would be like I did with that first card here and got that thank you to be just the height and the correct width. I also wanted to show you another sample. This one here, I have another layer going in. So I have the Daffodil Delight card base, and then of course the Blueberry Bushel, which is that 4 by 5 1/4. And then I went in for another layer and just did another 1/4 inch in for that. So lots of different ways to be able to layer your cards, and just using your paper trimmer and a ruler to get all of those exact measurements. And of course, knowing that your paper, your 8.5 by 11 paper can go in half. So for example, one sheet of paper, I can either get 2 card bases, or I can get a card base and then 2 layering pieces with those leftover ones. So I have both of these, and I just trimmed that off for that perfect layering effect. Of course, this I wouldn't necessarily want to layer onto a Melon Mambo card, but I could layer it onto a Whisper White card, and I could layer Whisper White onto my Melon Mambo card. So I hope all of that makes sense. Of course, when you sign up for my newsletters and get on my mailing list, then you get a free tutorial of basic card patterns and cuts. So I will leave a link at the end of this video, right on the video, that you can click and sign up to be on my mailing list and get that fabulous piece that you can use in your stamp room. Print it off, have it right there next to your Stampin' trimmer, and you'll be able to have all the perfect cuts and measurements for all of your next projects. So I hope you enjoyed today's quick tip about cutting your cardstock for paper crafting and other card making tutorials. Don't forget to check out my blog, laurastampad.com, for more inspiration and ideas. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Be sure to subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you next time. Happy stamping. Bye-bye.